Oh yeah, we'll hear you. Say something.
Hello.
Good.
It's going?
Yeah.
You sure?
Yeah, I'm sure. Had some recording difficulties that way. Well, this is going to be the last time that we meet until next fall sometime. And I realize that we're not going very fast when it takes 2.5 talks to get through one scene. And we're not going to suddenly be accelerating here. It's going to go slow for a little bit yet.
Are we going to start over the next fall?
No, we'll start where we leave off. Don't forget to remind me I have that butterfly bush for you. I'm not really concerned about how fast we're going because there's so much subject matter that is... This play is almost ideal for spiritual students because so much of the subject matter is the stuff that we're working on. And I have a suspicion that I may never get a chance to do this play again, so I'm going to have a good time with it. All right, we're on page 38. Act 2, Scene 4. Anybody want to? Eli, you're brave. We'll let you lead it off because it's a tough one.
Page 38?
Yeah.
Since I don't know anything about the play. You're right.
And then I'll go and pass it to Jerry and then work your way back that way. All right.
When I would pray and think, I think and pray to several subjects. Heaven hath my empty words, whilst my invention, hearing not my tongue, anchors on Isabel, heaven in my mouth, as if I did but only chew his name, and in my heart the strong and swelling evil of my conception, the state whereon I studied, is like a good thing, often being read, grown, seared, and tedious, yea, my gravity, wherein, let no man hear me, I take pride. Could I with boot change for an idle plume, which the air beats for vain? O place, O form, how often dost thou with thy case, thy habit, wrench off from fools, and tie the wiser souls to thy false seeming. Blood, thou art blood. Let's write good angel on the devil's horn. 'Tis not the devil's crest. How now? Who's there?
One Isabel, a sister, desires access to you.
Teach her the way. O heavens, why does my blood muster to my heart, making molded unable for itself, and disposing all of my other parts of necessary fitness? So play the foolish throngs with one of the swans come all to help him and to stop the air by which he should revive. And even so, the general, subject to a well-wished king, quit their own part and ubiquitous fondness crowd to his presence where their untaught love must need a pure offense.
You have one more line.
How now, fair maid?
I come to know your pleasure.
That you might know it would much better please me than to demand what is, your brother cannot live.
Even so, heaven keep your honor.
Yet he may live a while, and it may be as long as you or I, yet he must die.
Under your sentence?
Yea.
Back license. It's the chair.
Well, I beseech you that in his reprieve, longer or shorter, he may so fit it that his soul sicken.
Book, do you want to read?
Fie, these filthy vices. It were as good to pardon him that hath from nature stolen a man already made, as to remit their saucy sweetness that do coin heaven's image, and stamps there forbid. 'Tis all as
Say you so? Then I pose you quickly. Which had you rather, that the most just law now took your brother's life, or to redeem him, give up your body to such sweet uncleanliness as she that he hath stained?
Sir, believe this, I had rather give my body than my soul.
And talk not of your soul, for compelled sin stand more for number than for contempt. How say you?
Nay, I'll not warrant that, for I can speak against the thing I say. Answer to this, I, now the voice of the recorded law, pronounce a sentence on your brother's life. Might there not be a charity in sin? Might there not be a charity in sin to save this brother's life?
Did you do it? I'll take it as a peril to my soul. It is no sin at all, but charity.
Pleased you to do it at peril of your soul, with equal poise of sin and charity?
That I do beg his life. If it be sin, heaven let me bear it. You granting of my suit, if that be sin, I'll make it my morn prayer, to have it added to the faults of mine, and nothing of your answer.
Nay, but hear me, sense pursues not mine. Either you are ignorant or seem so crafty, and that's not good.
Let me be ignorant and in nothing good, but graciously to know I am no better.
Thus wisdom wishes to appear most bright when it doth tax itself, as these black masks proclaim an enshielded beauty 10 times louder than beauty could display. But mark me, to be received plain, I'll speak more gross. Your brother is to die.
So?
And his offense is so, as it appears, accounting to the law upon pain by pain.
True. Admit no other way to save his life, as I subscribe, not that nor any other, but in the loss of question, that you, a sister, finding yourself desired of such a person whose credit with the judge for own great place could fetch your brother from the manacles of the all-bonding law, and that there were no earthly mean to save him, but that either you must lay down the treasures of your body to this supposed, or else let him suffer. What would you do?
As much as for my poor brother as myself, that is, were I under the terms of death, the depression of keen whips I wear as rubies, and strip myself to death as to a bed. With longing have been sick for ere I gave my body up to shame.
Then must your brother die.
And 'twere the cheaper way. Better for a brother died at once, than that a sister, by redeeming him, should die forever.
Were not you, then, as cruel as the sentence that you have slandered so?
Ignominy and ransom and free pardon are of 2 houses. Lawful mercy is nothing kin to foul redemption.
You seemed of late to make the law a tyrant, and rather prove the sliding of your brother a merriment than a vice.
Oh, pardon me, my lord, it oft falls out. To have what we would have, we speak not what we mean. I something do excuse the thing I hate, for his advantage that I dearly love.
We are all frail.
I must let my brother die. If not, a bittery can only be whole and succeed by weakness.
Nay, women are frail too. Women are frail too. Aye, as the glasses where they view themselves, which are as easily broke as they make forms. Women, help heaven. Men their creation mar in profiting by them. Nay, call us 10 times frail. For we are oft as our complexions are, and credulous to false prints.
I think well, and from this testimony of your own sex, since I suppose we are made to be no stronger than faults may shape our frames. Let me be bold, and do as to your voice. Be that you are, that is a woman, you are more than none. If you be one as you are well expressed by all external knowledge, show it now by putting on the destined delivery.
I have no tongue but one. Gentle my Lord, let me entreat you to speak the former language.
Plainly conceive, I love you.
My brother did love Juliet, and you tell me that he shall die for it.
He shall not excel if you give me love.
I know your virtue hath a license in it, which seems a little fouler than it is, to pluck on others.
Believe me on mine honor, my words express my purpose.
Ha! Little honor to be much believed, that most pernicious purpose. Seeming, I will proclaim thee, Angelo. Look for it. Sign me a present pardon for my brother, or with an outstretched throat I'll tell the world aloud what man thou art.
Who will believe thee, Isabel? My unsouled name, the austereness of my life, my vouch against you in my place of estate, will your accusation overweigh that you shall stifle in your own report and smell of calumny? I have begun, and now I give my essential race a rein. Fit thy consent to my sharp appetite, lay by all niceties, delicious blushes that vanish what they sue for. Redeem thy brother by yielding thy body to my will, or else he must not only die the death, but my unkindness shall his death draw out to wring sufferance. Answer me tomorrow, or by the affection that now guides me most, I'll prove a tyrant again. As for you, say what you can, and my false overlays are true.
To whom should I complain? Did I tell this? Who would believe me? O perilous mouth, that bear in them one and the selfsame tongue, neither of condemnation or of proof, bidding the law make courtesy to the will, poking both right and wrong to the appetite, to follow as it draws out to my brother, though he hath fallen by procurature of the blood. He hath in him such a mind of honor, that had he 20 heads to tender down, or 20 bloody blocks, he kneeled them up, before a sister should her body stoop to such a poor position. And Isabel lived chaste, and brother died. More than our brother is our chastity. I'll tell him yet of Angelo's request, and bid his mind to death for his soul's rest.
Well, this scene's got quite a bit of material in, and we're going to take a shot at quite a bit of it. If you look at Angelo's first speech at line 38, it's pretty classical for spiritual aspirants like ourselves. First thing about it, shows inner division and inner struggle. And as long as we go along with life, and as long as we go along with the world, everything seems fine. We seem unified, and we seem to be peaceful, benign people. We think we're fine folks. And in the ways of the world, we probably are fine folks. However, when something higher stirs in us, and we aspire to that something higher, and we strive to live better lives, things become very different. When we strive to live in harmony with the source of our ideals, we learn very quickly that we're not unified, and that we're actually deeply divided. The light of the Spirit begins to illumine some of the darker corners of our unconscious, as well as some of the higher things of our spiritual side. In this illumination, the lower nature, that pseudo-self, or the false ego, is less able to hide. we're exposed to ourselves. And then comes an all-out struggle for the control of our being. It's a place where almost all of us are in. When we start this struggle, we find out that our lower nature is much more vigorous than we ever supposed, and that we have much more of what is dark and selfish and everything else in ourselves than we ever would have believed possible. Moreover, the coarse desires are more familiar to us, because the spiritual things that we're just beginning to see, sometimes we don't even recognize them. We can't see them. But some of our old lusts and some of our habits, they come real easily. We're much more used to functioning in desire. And we revel in it. As we saw last time, that false ego actually even gets strength in reveling in desires. It's much harder to grab a hold of an extremely subtle spiritual impulse and stick with it. So, even if we begin to see spiritual impulses, we often misunderstand them. Beside this, the spirit is still not really well established so that it can assert itself in full power. If it were, it would be a much easier task. And the resistance within ourselves is what strengthens the spirit. It's a moral muscle. We can see from what he says that Angelo has obviously studied lofty things over and over. And it's likely that he has practiced some kind of repetitive prayer. And repetition can be a very powerful and a mounting activity in our spiritual growth. It can be if we keep it alive. Otherwise, if we don't, it becomes, like he describes it, sere and tedious. The words are empty, and there are just so many vain repetitions that have nothing to them. To keep repetition alive, we have to work very deliberately, very attentively, and we have to bring the full power of the Spirit to bear on the concentration of doing that. If we don't, we drift off. When there is an adversarial conflict for control, all kinds of fascinating alternatives are offered to our consciousness, which, if we follow them, we can have great joy. It's just that the adversary, the desire nature, gets stronger. Angelo learns what I think every spiritual aspirant eventually learns. And that is, for a while, the desire body and the experience of desires can be very exciting. It can be pleasurable. And it can be preferred to what seems to be a dull, quiet life that has such difficult chores to do things. So it is exactly as Angelo says, that at first the devil seems to be more of a friend than a fiend, because it's quite exciting to be in desires. Moving on to the second speech, at line 19, he expresses a spiritual fact there, that the spirit directly expresses itself in the blood. It uses the nervous system also, but the nervous system is more indirect, And the things in the body that depend on the nervous system have all kinds of checks in them. Check, counter-check kind of things, the way the nervous system works. Whereas the blood just gets impelled directly and immediately as the spirit wishes. Now, Angelo describes breathless excitement, are his words, saying that the blood is concentrated in his heart. Now, that's not exactly true physiologically. The blood does not usually accumulate in the heart. When it does, it's a sign of valve problems, or most usually it's a sign of heart weakness, or even heart failure. But when it does happen, the symptoms are exactly as he describes. One is breathless and has all kinds of physical weakness. To even walk across this room the narrow way is a big chore when you have that kind of state. It does happen sometimes when there is a radical and extreme introversion that the blood leaves the periphery of the body and it does concentrate not only in the heart but in all of the internal organs. It's sort of like in fear we pull all the blood in, and no matter what the pigmentation of our skin is, we all blanch. We become significantly lighter when that happens. Since in his case it is, by his description, a heart-centered breathlessness, I think we have to see then that he's not completely a bad person. He's somebody that's, straining with his desires, but the heart is not a place of desire. The heart is a place of love, and he probably does have love beside all of the desire. In his third speech, at line 32, he reveals even more of himself. He's an introvert, and he's morally inhibited in his introversion. He's been described as cold and austere, but sometimes it isn't completely a controlled character that does that. It's out of inhibitive fear. The reason we can say that he is an inhibited introvert is the way he speaks. When he's speaking, he's trying to trying to bring across the idea of his seduction of Isabella. He's trying to bring it about in words that mean more things than one. His words are not just prosaic conversation. They have double meanings to them. And he probably is shy and divided. And maybe part of him would like to back out and not follow his desires. And if you have double meanings to the words, you always have a chance to do that. You can say, oh, that isn't what I meant this instead. That happens. So if he were just an outright sensualistic scoundrel, he'd just say what he wanted, and he'd be very frank about it. He continues on with the same kind of trend of indirect speaking, and with his wavering resolve, and he does that in his next speech. Isabella, on the other hand, in her speech at line 39, shows that she's interested in her brother's soul as much or more than she's interested in the life of his body. At 42, Angelo slips into his moral self-righteousness. That's his way of doing things, and it's again with very complicated language, because he can't be straightforward because he isn't straight. He's fighting back and forth, and he has a very convoluted moral consciousness. He's almost cynical when he says that death might be good to forgive the death of a good man, as it is for forgiveness to make a bad man good. He doesn't believe in forgiveness. He doesn't think it has any effect at all. I suppose if somebody forgives the way he forgives, that is true. Forgiveness requires an awful lot of love. You have to give something that makes up for what is being forgiven. If you don't give that and just say, I forgive you, that you're not doing anything with your forgiveness. Angelo continues on and he shows his sly, cunning, devious consciousness in the next speech around line 51 when he first propositions her hypothetically. We've all been in those kind of conversations where we hypothetically say, well, if someone were to say something like this to you, how would you respond? He's timid and he wants that kind of response. You know, he's doing it all hypothetically. Isabella is as pure and innocent as can be because she doesn't get the gist. And so the next one, at line 59, he becomes even bolder in his proposition. And he starts bringing in his strength. If a person can't be loved for what they are, they have to bring something else to the table. And he's bringing in the fact that he is, in his words, above the law, and he can remand his own decisions and the law at will. Now, this is very important to us with regard to what we're trying to do in this series of talks. When we had the theme talk after Romeo and Juliet, we said that the reason and the only reason that we could connect cause and consequence together as two phases of an ongoing activity in a continuity was because we had something of the unity in which causes and consequences are carried out. Thus, at the foundation of our being, the law and all of the actions that are accomplished under the law of cause and consequence, or cause and effect, or action and reaction, are happening within the unity of our own spiritual being, or of the spiritual being that we share. At that time we said that the more we transcend the law, that is to the common unity, the more we can see the intents and purpose of the law. It's when we get outside of the whole mechanism, all of the machinations of how this cause leads to these effects and such like that, that we can see the intent behind it. Because ultimately everything we do is part of a divine creative intent. And then we carry it out through the law. But when we carry it out through the law and we step inside, we don't always see the connections between cause and consequence, and we lose the higher intent and purpose. When we have that kind of advantage that we can transcend, we can redirect causes, and we can bring the best out of things that are irremediable. So something like this is what Angelo is working with, but he's doing it in a twisted way. He's saying that he is above the law, and by his command he can have sin, he can have one sin done in love redeem another. In a way, he is above the law, but it's a human law, and it isn't the law of cause and consequence that is behind every action that we do. Moreover, he's suggesting something really twisted. He's inverting the law. He's working against the spirit of the law. And he's doing so for his own ends. The end of the law is love. And his selfishness is the opposite of law, of love. So this is love with a capital L that he is going against. Since the divine love which transcends the law is the source of everything that is created, its forgiveness is creative. It's all new. You're creating something different than what has ever been there before. Otherwise, it really isn't a forgiveness. It's just an empty word. Forgiveness becomes that. So it gives the recipient of such grace or of such love, it gives that recipient a whole new life. They still have their causes and consequences to deal with, but they have a new life. Moreover, that love from life spirit, which is above the law or even the idea of the law, is the source of truth with a capital T. And so it is a love wisdom. And with a forgiveness of that kind, one can see through all of the transgressions, and one can understand the principles that are behind them. Because there is an intuitive kind of clarity that is there. So though he's proposing that a venal sin out of love for Isabella is all that he's suggesting, his real sin is playing God and taking the law in his own hands and twisting it. So his sin is of a much higher order and it isn't just a venal thing. Around line 69, Isabella shows just exactly how virtuous she is. Even though Angelo has pretty much spelled it out for her, she still doesn't understand that she's being propositioned. She just doesn't think in terms of pleasure-seeking carnality. This is a really pure kind of consciousness that Isabella has. It would seem that there's probably an even higher kind of consciousness than that of Isabella, the kind of consciousness that could see the proposition as a proposition from that kind of love wisdom and not be turned away by it. But with my track record, I would be just as happy to have the kind of virtue that Isabella has, and I would be very happy. She's really beautiful because she is willing to take on the burden of sin of her brother, even though she doesn't deserve it. She doesn't want the sin itself, but she's willing to take on the burden of it, the weight and the heaviness, and to treat it with love and treat it with prayer, as she says, for his sake. That's a beautiful kind of character. That's real love. And at the same time, she's willing to take on the burden of sin of Angelo, that he might incur for remanding the law. She recognizes that he's human, and in his humanness, he has frailty, and that if he does an act of virtue that goes against the law, he might have some kind of breach of proper moral conduct in that activity or ethical conduct in that activity that he needs love for, and she's perfectly willing to do that. She's quite a spiritual person. But the next exchange between the two of them carries this theme ever so much further. At line 73 through 83, Angelo recognizes really how spiritually beautiful she is. And in order to see that, he can't be all bad. You have to have something of the nature of what you are seeing in order to be able to recognize it. And so if he can see that she has this kind of moral beauty, he must have at least a tad of it, or he wouldn't be able to see it all. Nonetheless, between 88 and 98, that doesn't deter his desire. We have to remember that this is a man that has been repressing his desire for probably most of his life. And when he starts letting it loose, it's going to have its way. And so in between 88 and 98, he gets very fundamental. To me, Isabella's response between 99 and 103 is both surprising and not surprising. She is a Christian, and she's a spiritual idealist. So it's not surprising that she would be a martyr and take the words of Christ, "Greater love hath no man than he lay down his life for his friends." So that part is not surprising. She would just as soon take unjust punishment and death than to live in baseness. That part's not surprising at all. But if I were to find myself in that position, if I try to imagine myself as Isabella, as somebody who's just about to take the vows of a nun and to live a celibate, pure life, and somebody propositioned me in the way that Angelo has done it, with all of his pretense to an austere morality, my response would not be the same as Isabella's. My response would be a emotional and genuine response, but it would be a laugh at the recognition of what was being said and the enormity of it. It would be a laugh. Ela and I, a few years ago, read those books by Han Su-yin that when she was working in Hong Kong during the Chinese Revolution, she was a physician, and she worked with another doctor, and they had to sew people together that were just basically torn to bits. And they couldn't cry even. They looked at the reality of what they had to do, and the only thing that would relieve them was laughing. And so they would be in the operating room laughing, not at somebody else's misfortune, but just at the recognition of the enormity of things. Some things are too powerful for any other kind of expression than a laugh, because it's the only way you can let go of some of those things. Obviously, the juxtaposition of how true and how false the consciousness of Angelo is, what the true man is versus the false appearances that he gives, when you see something that different from what is purported to be, it's always funny. In the next few exchanges, Isabella unfolds an understanding of character and of ideals that is really magnificent. In the lines between 105 and 108, she distinguishes the difference between physical death and soul death. She knows that she's so deeply committed to the love that transcends the laws that she can't waver from that at all. I think this passage is drawn on the line in the Gospels where Jesus says, "Don't worry about those who can destroy the body, but beware those who would destroy the soul." She is not rejecting Angelo because of the carnal nature of his proposition, but because it would undermine the very principle of love and the very ideals that she lives by. She doesn't disdain death, but she shows that it has no power over her. She could much rather die many times than live in ignominy. She even throws back Angelo's own words at him. At line 35 and 36, she throws his own words back into his teeth. At line 111, she shows that she knows the difference between buying favor and receiving grace. Don't have to comment too much on that. It speaks very clearly for itself. But in the next speech at line 117, she does a very remarkable thing. She admits that she exaggerated. She admits that she misspoke and that she does it out of love. Most people in the heat of an argument or a moral dispute would never give quarter, would never admit to anything. And she's so secure and so founded in her principles that she can say, hey, I made a mistake. Yes, I did say things more drastically than I meant. In line 138, she sees feminine vanity, and she so shows that she sees through the part that men play in it. This is a surprisingly feminist statement by Shakespeare. Seeing the part that men contribute. Takes two hands to clap, and that some of the feminine attitudes are as much due to men as to women. Probably one of the most beautiful things about Isabella is her attitude about herself. Angelo identifies with the law, and identification weakens him. He identifies with his position of administrator of the law, which he thinks puts him above it, and he runs amok in doing that. But the unity that really does transcend the law is so thorough that it doesn't belong to any one individual. And no mere human focus can claim to be that unity that is above the law. Moreover, the very way that the life spirit, to speak technically, that transcends the law functions is by self-sacrifice. That's how it keeps itself pure. It sacrifices and it doesn't get involved with self-assertion. Isabella accepts the common lot of everyone. And as a consequence, she's in sync with the spirit that we all have in common. She's self-sacrificing like the life spirit. She doesn't have to ballyhoo about her principles. She lives them. She speaks from them, but she doesn't make a big deal of it the way Angelo does. It's always excessive what he's saying. So she's as true to the principles as she can be. But she's not a scholar. She's not a moralist. But she understands the principles because she loves them. Along around line 130, Angelo uses an argument that I have heard in various forms and have never understood it. And as a consequence, I think it's totally invalid. Years ago, when there were very few vegetarians around, I heard it with regard to my vegetarianism, but I most especially hear it with regard to the principle of generative purity, which is not the same thing as celibacy. It means chaste living except for childbearing. This argument states that if one doesn't adhere to the common accepted customs of humanity, no matter how bad those customs may be, then one is unhuman, and as Angelo puts it, less than human. And it just doesn't make any sense to me. The standard definitions of what a human is are rationality and mortality. We all went through those syllogisms in logic classes. All men are mortal. All men are rational, or man is the rational animal. That's sexist language, but it's shorthand. What seems to be implied in this argument is that unless somebody sins, one is not human. Now, it is true that we all do sin, and there is something that we are humbled and that we are brought to a level of acceptance of each the act of sinning. But sinning is no problem. It's not sinning that is difficult. The people who use the argument, that employ the argument that Angelo does, that aspiration is unnatural or unhuman. Aspiring to transcendental values or to ideals is unnatural. Certainly it's unnatural. But it is thoroughly human because we as humans really are divine. And if we are natural, we're nothing more than animals, which are completely natural. And it is the aspirations that really raise us above the brute nature. And it is those aspirations that give us hope. People who use this argument are often offended by intense idealism. It's too much. I think it's too extremist. Perhaps it's less a matter of offensiveness in idealism than it is a matter of defensiveness in people who have feelings of guilt or of culpability. I sometimes even think that this argument is untrue, that people will attack you for your ideals because they really do respect them and they know that they're not living according to theirs. And part of them is very happy to see it, but they have to defend themselves. Now, I don't know whether Shakespeare intended it or not, or whether Isabella is supposed to be portrayed as a master psychologist, but once Angelo brings up this bogus argument, the argument that unless you sin, you're less than human, when he does that, the whole character of the conversation between them, the whole argument shifts. It's one of those turning point things. Now, Isabella is by no means aggressive, but she's not afraid to go on the offense. And from that point on, when he has been defensive in that way, she goes on the offense and she does it with sauce. She's not mean. She's not vicious. She just tells it the way it is. That is, that he's a scoundrel, and she tells him that. Isabella probably believes that the secrets that have been from the foundation of the earth will be shouted from the rooftops. Because she says, I'm going to expose you. And at that point, Angelo responds with a stance of power. When he says, he's no more Mr. Nice Guy, when he says, my false overweighs your true. And that's the argument of might is right. It appears, though, that in the light of the truth working in her, he does see himself, and he sees his desire clearly, and he acts on it. That's what happens if we live lives of truth. And the times that we can do that and act in that way, we illumine, not by intention, we illumine others, and they can see themselves in that illumination. Isabella sees her situation. She sees it as a matter of chastity versus her brother's life. Now she chooses the former over the latter, which might seem very strange to us. However, she's defined it earlier. In her eyes, it's a matter of blackmail and sin versus her brother's life. Now, even though her choice might seem very strange to us, and, like the blackmail would seem like the lesser of two evils. In our materialistic times, where we're all preoccupied with material things and sell ourselves out to what we call life, which is only our idea of life, she sees that it's a matter of sin versus not sin. What the world would do would say, well, if you do it and sleep with him, that'll be forgiven, but you'll have a chance to live. She has different understandings than that. She wants to have the opportunity to live in honor and to live in truth. All right. We've got one more scene that we can get done tonight. It'll only take another 2.5 hours. Who's up?
Me. So then, you hope of pardon from Lord Angelo?
The miserable have no medicine, but only hope. I have hope to live, and prepared to die.
The absolute for death, either death or life, shall thereby be the sweeter. Reason thus with life. If I do lose thee, I do lose a thing, that none but fools would keep. The breath thou art, servile to all the skies influence. But does this habitation, where thou keepst, hourly afflict? Really thou art death's fool, for him thou laborest, by thy flight to shun, and yet run towards him still. Thou art not noble, for all the accommodations that thou bearest are nursed by baseness. Thou art by no means valiant, for thou dost fear the soft and tender fork of a poor worm. Thy best of rest is sleep, and that thou oft provokest, for grossly fearest thy death, which is no more. Thou art not thyself, for thou exists on many 1,000 grains that issue out of dust. Happy thou art not, for what thou hast not, still thou strivest to get. What thou hast, forgettest. Thou art not certain, thy complexion shifts to strange effects after the moon. Thou art rich, thou art poor, but I can ask whose back with ingots bows. Thou bearest thy heavy riches but a journey, as death unloads thee. Friend hast thou none, for thine own bowels, which do call thee sire, and their effusion of thy proper loins, curse the gout, serpigo, and the womb, for ending thee no sooner. Thou hast nor youth nor age, but as it were an after-dinner sleep, dreaming on both, for all thy blessed youth becomes as aged, and beg the alms of palsied elves, for thou art old and rich, thou hast neither heat, affection, limb, nor beauty to make thy riches pleasant. What's yet in this that bears the name of life? Yet in this life lie hidden 1,000 deaths, yet death we fear, that makes these odds all even.
I humbly thank you. To sue to live, I find I seek to die, and seeking death, find life.
What ho! Peace here, grace and good company.
Who's there? Come in, Anne. Come in. The wish deserves a welcome.
Yes, sir.
Look is up.
Oh. Dear sir, ere long I'll visit you again.
Most holy sir, I thank you.
My business is a word or two with Claudio.
You're very welcome. Look, Senor. Here's your sister. Provost, a word with you.
As many as you please.
Bring me to view them speak, where I may be conceived.
Now, sister, what's the comfort?
Why, as all comforts are, most good indeed. Lord Angelo, having affairs to heaven, intends you for his swift ambassador. Wherefore you shall be an everlasting leader. Therefore your best appointment make with speed. Tomorrow is set on.
Is there no remedy?
None but such remedy as to save a head, to keep a heart inflamed.
Is there any?
Yes, brother, you may live. There is a devilish mercy in the church. If you will implore it, that will free your life, but fetter you to death.
Perpetual durance?
Just perpetual endurance of restraint. So all the world, lucidity, you had to determine scope.
But in what nature?
In such a one as you consenting to it would bark your honor from that trunk you bear and leave you naked.
Let me know the point.
Oh, I do fear thee, Claudio, and I quake, lest thou a feverous life shouldst entertain. 6 or 7 winters more respect than a perpetual honor. Darest thou die? Sense of death is most in apprehension. Poor beetle that we tread upon in corporal sufferance, and the thing is great as when a giant dies.
Why give you me this shame? Think you I can a resolution fetch from flowery tenderness? If I must die, I will encounter darkness as a bride, and hug it in my arms.
There spake my brother, there my father's grave did utter forth a voice. Yes, thou must die. Thou art too noble to conserve a life in base appliances. This outward sainted deputy, whose settled visage and deliberate word nips youth in the head, and follies doth immue, as falcon doth the fowl, is yet a devil. His filth within being cast, it would appear a pond as deep as hell.
Frenzy, Angelo.
Well, 'tis the cunning livery of hell, to damn this body to invest and cover in frenzied guards. Dost thou think, Claudio, if I would yield him my virginity, thou mightst be freed?
Oh heavens, it cannot be.
Yes, he would give it thee from this rank offense, so to offend him still. This night's the time that I should do what I abhor to name, or else thou diest tomorrow.
Thou shalt not do it.
O whereupon my right, I throw it down for your deliverance, as frankly as it is.
Thanks to Isabel. Be ready, Claudio, for your death tomorrow.
Yes, he has affections in him, but thus can make him bite the law by the nose. But who would force it? Sure it is no sin, for of the deadly 7 it is the least.
Which is the least?
If it were damnable, he being so wise, why would he for the momentary trick be perdurably fined? Oh, Isabel.
What says my brother?
Death is a fearful thing.
And shamed life are hateful.
Aye, but to die and go we know not where, to lie in cold obstruction and to rot, this sensible warm motion to become a kneaded clot, and the delighted spirit to bathe in fiery floods, or to reside in thrilling region of thick-ribbed ice, to be imprisoned in the viewless winds and blown with restless violence round about the pendant world, or to be worse than worse, those that lawless and uncertain thought imagined howling 'Tis too horrible. The weariest and most loathed worldly life, that age, ache, penury, and imprisonment can lay on nature is a paradise to what we fear of death.
Alas, alas. Please, Sister, let me live. What sin you do to save a brother's life, nature dispenses with, to be so far that it becomes a virtue.
Oh, you beast, oh faithless coward, or dishonest wretch, wilt thou be made a man out of my vice? Is it not a kind of incest to take life from thine own sister's shame? What should I think? Heaven shield my mother, played my father fair, and such a warped slip of wilderness never issued from his blood. Take my defiance, die, perish. Might but my bending down reprieve thee from thy fate, it should proceed. I'll pray 1,000 prayers for thy death, no word to save thee.
Nay, hear me, Isabel.
Oh, fie, fie, fie. My sin is not accidental, but a trade. Mercy to thee will prove itself abroad. Best that thou diest quickly.
Oh, hear me, Isabella. Vouchsafe a word, young sister, but one word.
Might you dispense with your leisure, I would by and by have some speech with you. The satisfaction I would require is likewise your own benefit.
I have no superfluous leisure. My escape must be stolen out of other affairs, but I will attend you a while.
Son, I have overheard what hath passed between you and your sister. Angelo hath never the purpose to corrupt her. Only he hath made an assay of her virtue to practice his judgment with the disposition of natures. She, having the truth of honor in her, hath made him that gracious denial which he is most glad to receive. I am confessor to Angelo, and know this to be true. Therefore prepare yourself to death. Do not satisfy your resolution with hopes that are fallible. Tomorrow you must die. Go to your knees and make ready.
Let me ask my sister pardon. I am so out of love with life that I will soon to be rid of it. Oh, you there, farewell. Well, what's the word with you?
What is your will, Father?
Now that you have come, you will be gone. Leave me a while with the maid. My mind promises with my habit, no loss shall touch her by my company. In good time.
The hand that has made you fair hath made you good. The goodness that is chief in beauty makes beauty brief in goodness. But grace, being the soul of your complexion, shall keep the body of it ever fair. The assault that Angelo hath made to you, fortune hath conveyed to my understanding. And but that frailty hath examples for his failing, I should wonder at Angelo. How will you do to content the substitute and to save your brother?
I am now going to resolve him. I had rather my brother die by the law than my son should be unlawfully born. But oh, how much is the good Duke deceived in Angelo! If ever he return and I can speak to him, I will open my lips in vain or discover his government.
That shall not be much amiss. Yet, as the matter now stands, he will avoid your accusation. He made trial of you only. Therefore, fasten your ear on my advising. To the love I have in doing good, a remedy presents itself. I do make myself believe that you may most righteously do a poor wronged lady a merited benefit. Redeem your brother from the angry law. Do not stain your own gracious person, and much please the absent Duke, if peradventure he shall ever return, and hearing of his business.
Let me hear you speak farther. I have spirit to do anything that appears not foul in the truth of my spirit.
Virtue is bold, and goodness never faithful. It carried at sea.
I have heard of the lady, and good words went with her name.
She should have, Angelo, have married, was it Pius to her by occult and mutual appointed, between which time of the contract and of the remedy. Her brother Frederick was wrapped at his city, having in that carried vessel the dowry of his sister. But mark how heavily he fell to the poor young woman when she lost a noble and her own brother. His love toward her, ever most kind and natural, with him the portion and the canoe of her fortune of her marriage dowry, his altar and covenant husband, this well-seeming Angelo. Can this be so, the Angelo believer?
Left her in tears and dried not one of them with his comfort, swallowed his vows whole, pretending in her discoveries of dishonor. In few bestowed on her own lamentation, which she yet wears for his sake, and he, a marvel to her tears, is washed with them, but he laments not.
What the merit what if in this case was made from the world? What corruption in this life in this world let this man live? How out of this can she away? It is a rupture that you may easily heal. Sure that not only saves the brother, keeps you from dishonor as good.
Show me how this, Father. This forenamed maid hath yet in her continuance of her first affection his unjust unkindness, that in all reason should have quenched her love, hath, like an impediment in the current, made it more violent and unruly. Go you to Angelo, answer his requiring with a plausible obedience, agree with his demands to the point, only refer yourself to this advantage. First, that your stay with him may not be long, that the time may have all shadow and silence in it, and the place answer to convenience. This being granted in course, and now follows all, we shall advise this wronged maid to speed up your appointment. Go in your place. Stay. If the encounter acknowledge itself hereafter, it may compel him to her recompense, and here by this is your brother saved, your honor untainted, the poor Mariana advantaged, and the corrupt deputy scale. The maid will I frame and make fit for his attempt. If you think well to carry this, as you may, the doubleness of the benefit defends the deceit from reproof. What think you of it?
The image of it gives me content already, and I trust it will woefully multiply his perfection.
It lies much in your holding up. Haste you speedily to Angelo. If for this night he entreats you to his bed, give him promise of satisfaction. I will presently to St. Luke's. There at the moated grange resides this dejected Mariana. At that place call upon me and dispatch with Angelo, that it may be quickly.
I thank you for this comfort. Fare you well, good Father.
Well, we're at the turning point in the play, always in the middle act. That's the way it is. Now all we have is another hour worth of laborious comments. Socrates says it, Jesus agrees, and so does Carlos Castaneda. And now we find, through the words of the Duke as a monk, Shakespeare saying the same thing. Death is our friend. Socrates and Jesus speak of the good after death. Castaneda speaks about how an awareness of death helps us to live with greater urgency. The take from Shakespeare is a different kind of take. The Duke or monk points out how death is freedom from all the painful limitations of this earthly life. how in a way it is a release and an escape. His idea seems to be that groveling and clinging to our conception of life sours the experience itself, the conception that he's concerned with. We torture and we terrorize ourselves with the fear of loss. It's not an indictment of life, but it is a statement about our attitude and our activities about life and in life. The aim of the Duke or the monk is to correct that attitude by showing how silly or how absurd our actions are, how the things that we seek are really the opposite of our deluded intentions. The Duke doesn't have to speak about the glories of heaven. He has clarity of insight. In the truth that he utters, he speaks of it as it lives, and the real reality of things. He's really, really very clear. So one of the most wonderful speeches, I think, in all of Shakespeare. He doesn't have to talk about eternity, because what he says is basically timeless. He's talking about attitudes that have gone on and on and on and still go on. When you look at it, he sees things in such a way that death is merely a partition, and that our misconception turns that partition into an unreality on both sides. So in short, his vision is the vision of continuity and of universality. It just doesn't quit. And the points that he makes are so clear that all of our illusions are immediately washed away. We can see right through our foibles and our accustomed way of looking at life. And it doesn't have to be talking about all kinds of bright lights and colors and things like that. The clarity of his understanding of what's really going on is a clairvoyance. Clairvoyance means clear vision, and he's seeing right through. It doesn't have to be with auras or any of that. It's a difficult speech to read. Mark did a very excellent job with it, but it's eloquent, and it bears fruit. He is successful in that Claudio sees the truth. And how does he say it? I seek to die, and seeking death, find life. And he says the big words. Let it come on. It's like our modern slang. Bring it on. You can see how the scene unfolds right from there. We've said it several times before, but it's something that's always worth repeating. There are greater and more subtle trials in success than there are in failure. When we're down, we're humble. When we're faced with dire consequences from our deeds and the inadequacies of how we have given ourselves to life, we're honest. We can't bluff reality, or we can't bluff the trials that are before us. However, when we're on top of things and everything is going our way, we tend to see things differently. It would be all right if we just lived well and enjoyed all of the manifold blessings of life. But we add an unnecessary element and that obscures our vision and puts us way off. That element is vanity. Egoism distorts everything. We think that we personally are responsible for all of our success. And we take pride in our wondrous achievement. We puff ourselves up and we crow about it, even if we only do it to ourselves. I'm a sneak crower. I do it when I'm by myself alone. I really told them that time, you know. When we do that, we lose the focus of attention. We can't stay with that subtle joy. And we don't just enjoy life. We have our own superfluous concept of it. When we do that, we are assuring ourselves of the down cycle being filled with humiliation and unnecessary suffering if we hadn't taken all of that egoistic joy in ourselves. It's easy when you're with someone like the Duke or monk, when you're with a spiritual teacher, everything is clear, very clear. But as soon as you're off a little way, it all evaporates. You say to yourself, where did that all go? And you even begin to believe that it's an illusion, that there really wasn't any truth there. However, the success of that experience of life has its trial right within it. Claudio gets the idea of the monk, and he takes it almost like a slogan. Just before he says, bring it on, he says, I'm going to look for death and find life, and I'm going to give up looking for life in reaching death. As soon as Isabel arrives, he gets the answer to his request for bring it on. And his regression into darkness is very interesting to follow, because it's a path that most of us take on a pretty regular basis, and if we watch it or look at it objectively, we may get some insights into how we can live better. From the very onset, when she starts talking to him, she's straight up. She said she's there to prepare him for death. Even before he knows that there is a way out, which is really an evasion of good living, he's looking for one. He's eating his own words. When you're at line 61 or at line 63, he's eating his own words. Isabella is spiritually wise, and she's very principled. She points out that the only way out in material terms would be to perpetuate one's imprisonment in the illusion of self-seeking. She does that around lines 64 through 69. And after trying to uplift him to spiritual principle and having mixed success, she appeals to his honor. Around line 71 or 72, she appeals to his honor. But he still wants material particulars. See, we've all had that. We have an ideal before us, and we know it's true, but I just want a few material particulars, which again pulls us right away from things. She quivers at this point, because she senses already that he's going to fail. But she puts forth the spiritual principle and even dares him to act honorably. She does that around lines 74 to 81. He responds positively. It's easy to respond positively when it's in abstract. That's where we often go astray. We live in an abstract life and not in the real thing. But when he responds positively, she opens up to him, which was her intent in the first place. And she gives him the whole matter. Now this brings up a subject that we've brought up 2 other times in these talks, but with very different circumstances. And that is the subject of conscious knowledge or awareness. In order to understand this variation on the subject of conscious knowledge, we have to be first clear about Isabella's intention, or else we won't understand the variation. She's very clear in when she says she's doing it to prepare Claudio for his death. She feels honor-bound to tell him the full truth. She has to disclose the whole matter to him. The activity has a trial for Claudio in it, and she's fully conscious of that trial, and she's fully conscious of the fact that he might fail. But the giving of the opportunity, the presenting of the trial that can give success, is worth the doing of it, and she does that. All right, now we can go back and look at conscious intention. If you remember in the very first play that we did about 4 years ago,
Clear as a bell, yeah.
Leontes says, if we drink a poisonous spider and we don't see it, we won't die. But if we see it and we consciously know it, then we're going to die. Now that is, of course, a superstition. Poison is poison, whether we know it or not. The same principle in another garb comes up earlier in this play. Ascaleus is trying to talk Angelo out of executing Claudio, and he says, you know, on that jury, there are people that are guilty of the same sin as Claudio and worse. So why should we be hanging Claudio? Angelo's response is, but we don't know that they have done it. But we know Angelo has fornicated, and that knowledge means we have to act on it. In that case, the self-consciousness changes everything. It's not a superstition like the superstition of Leontes in The Winter's Tale. He's right. When you know something, you can't unknow it, especially if it's taken personally. If you see your own sins, you can't say, I don't sin. When you once know it, it's really clear. It is a little bit more dicey when you start looking at other people's sins, but that's a whole other issue. We have a greater consciousness of reality when we know something in full waking consciousness, and we're responsible for that because we are participants in reality. We can't know about spiritual things and not do something for the good of the world because, we're responsible. Now, in defense of Leontes, there are things that are done in ignorance that, if they were done with full self-consciousness, might not be successful. There was just a story this last week about a little girl, I think it was in Australia. She was out in the backyard playing with her little kitten. and she went over to play with some toy, and a python came and got her kitten. She went and attacked the python, and she wrestled the kitten away from the python, and the python bit her in the lip, and she started screaming, and that's when her mother came out, and they dispatched the python at that point. But that's a case of she wasn't self-conscious of the danger. She cared, and because she cared, and because she acted with full boldness and braveness, she pulled off something that most people couldn't pull off at all. So we can see that self-consciousness can have two different responses. One can neurotically psych oneself out in some kind of defeatist complex. Look at how big my foe is, or how fast he can run, and you psych yourself out and you doubt yourself. Or one can judiciously, and in the case of Angelo, self-righteously, act on it with a sense of responsibility. Now, Isabel is trying to do something very different with Claudio. She wants him to be fully self-conscious of what is at stake, but not just the mundane factors. For her, everything is seen in terms of spiritual principles. She's preparing him to die. Her take on the situation is something like, he's going to die anyway. But if he dies self-consciously choosing to live by divine principle, by choosing self-sacrifice to divine principle, it is much better than merely dying for breaking a law about sexual conduct. Because at this point she's clear that she's not going to sleep with Angelo. And it's much better if she can get him to know the whole facts, and he's going to die the next day anyway. If he can do what he does, that's a big step forward in evolution to make that kind of sacrifice. Of course, she wouldn't think in terms of evolution or steps forward. She would think in terms of some kind of eternal salvation or something like that. But nonetheless, she does everything in terms of spiritual principle. This is something like a spiritual stoicism that goes a step beyond Brutus's beyond Brutus's philosophical stoicism. You remember that play from 2 years ago? This is absolutely crazy, I guess. It's a voluntary willingness to have his life taken because of his love for another and because of his love for a divine principle. It is having his life taken, and that's martyrdom. That's not suicide. So this would constitute a lofty action. As a Stoic, he would realize that he has to die at some time or another. In one case, it would be for an ideal. That is saying that the intent is more important than the circumstance of merely dying. The intent is to die with a higher purpose or for something beyond mere living. Now, this is really sticky and complicated. Issues like this are always sticky and complicated. We as modern materialists would all almost want to say, wouldn't it be better if Isabella sacrificed her maidenhead so that Claudio could live and love Juliet and their little child? Now that's a righteous consideration also. But what Isabella would counter with is that it is wrong to live in disgrace and in ignominy like the Indian Menominee. And even if he did live, Claudio would probably hate himself for living the way he did. And with that in his consciousness, he wouldn't be a good father in the first place. These are the kind of arguments that would come out of this. In terms of spiritual philosophy, this is interesting in another way. Isabella's argument is from spiritual principle. All spiritual principle is found in the region of abstract or ideational thought. But that region of abstract or ideational thought is also called the region of human spirit, because the central idea of all of the ideas in that realm is the idea of self. And the idea of self is God. As a consequence, when there is a dedication to principle, it is a matter of self, and it is a matter of self-orientation. It's easy to see that all of Isabella's arguments for herself or for her brother involve self-consciousness and self-responsibility and individual salvation. Love, the kind of love that transcends the law, also transcends principle. So that is an even higher way of living. And that love takes one outside and beyond self into the selfness that all share in common. Now this brings out some very interesting questions about the advisability of seeking individual salvation. Because seeking individual salvation puts you into the realm of self. Love requires self-consciousness. One must self-consciously be a vehicle or a vessel for love, and self-centeredness must be sacrificed to that love. Love requires responsibility, and it gives freedom. But all of those things are of a much higher level than living by principle. When people live by the principle of things, that may be fine, but it never resolves things as well as when people live by love. Because by love, there's always a unification. And there's one other little interesting thing in this little passage or this little area. It's almost ironic, but as things are stated, it opens to a statement of the fact that now for it is the circumstance presents it, either he has to die for sex or he has to die for not sex. And if you look at the circumstance doesn't give you anything. You have to look for the principle. We have just a few minutes here. Let's look a little bit at Claudio's descent from spiritual idealism. When the whole matter is brought to his attention, his first responses at line 94 and line 99 are surprise, and shock, and amazement. He almost is in disbelief. Now, Shakespeare seems to be correct in describing the situation in that way. Anytime something completely new comes into our consciousness and we recognize it, everything is upset. It's now the fancy word for it is there's a paradigm shift and one has to adjust to it. But it is disorienting. Your life is different. In at lines 103 and in 107, the speech is there. His first response is idealism. You're not going to do it. Now this, Shakespeare is correct in this also, because this is expected and psychological. The reason being is that the Spirit is eternal and it's immediately present. It's there all the time. So when he does begin to recover from the amazement, the first thing that will present itself to him is there all the time, and that would be the intuition and the idealistic stance about it. And that's just the way it happens. You know, people say on the street, you know, always follow your first notion on it. You know, they say, you know, like, don't have a second thought. When things settle into the desire body, where the defensive and domineering personal ego is located, then things start to change. The first thing that happens in this case, the lower ego is always insecure because it knows it's not the real thing. It knows it's a phony. And the first way it acts is by projection. So when the speech is at 108 and at 113, he projects rage and places the responsibility on the dastardly Angelo. The defensive ego always likes to have boogeymen and to revel in the hatred of them. Isabella doesn't let him try to escape his responsibility. She works very hard to keep his attention on the fact that his life in the Spirit depends on himself and on no one else. She does that around line 117, if you're following the lines. As he begins to realize that Angelo, evil or not, will not save his life, materially or spiritually, Claudio's consciousness changes again. However, instead of staying with the spiritual clarity that has been given to him by the monk or by Isabella, he brings it into his personal being. He looks at it personally. And what does he do in his next speeches at 117 and 119? He feels sorry for himself. And he falls for all the materialistic illusions about death. And as he continues to not accept his responsibility, he sinks even deeper into self-indulgence. Feeling sorry for himself is the beginning of self-indulgence. He looks for material salvation. I'll be better if I live longer. And he looks for it outside of himself in Isabella. In the same way that the bad guy was outside of him in Angelo, the good guy is outside in Isabella. And he begs her to redeem him through the very sin that got him into the trouble in the first place. So he has devolved, or he has degenerated, he has sunk lower and lower in a very psychological way. Shakespeare does this really masterfully. And it's something that we see in ourselves when something happens like that. Whether she acts from compassion or whether it's from a rigid, cold idealism, it is a matter of guesswork. We don't know enough about Isabella to really know how compassionate or uncompassionate she is. We may not ever know, even at the end of the play. But in any case, she is astute enough that she can see through him, and she lets him know what she sees, and that is that he is a coward. Now that's as far as we're going to go tonight. There's much more in the scene that we could tackle, but I don't know that we're going to tackle it. And we'll come back next fall and continue on from here. So it's a long break, and we can all try to figure out whether she does everything from compassion or idealism.
When we start again, are we going to have about a 6-hour renewal? Review as to what?
No, I'm afraid not. You know, that reminds me of that story. Did you hear about that rope that tried to get into the bar where everybody was celebrating and dancing up a storm? And the doorman looked at him and says, "You're a rope. I can't let you in here." And so the rope goes around to the back of the building and knots himself up and throws dirt on himself and just roughs himself up, and he goes back up to the bar and says, "No," he says, "Can I come in?" And the doorman says, "Aren't you that rope that was just here before?" He says, "No, I'm afraid not." Yeah, thank you.
I gotta go. Hi, everybody. Thank you.
Yeah.